Hi, everyone. My name is Becky Robinson, and I'm so thrilled to be able to have a great conversation with Jeff Evans today. As you're coming into the Zoom, we're going to give you a few moments to get settled in, and I'll be sharing with you a few technical considerations. Again, welcome. The first thing that I would invite you to do is locate your chat panel. And what I'm going to invite you to do is please use the drop-down menu to select all panelists and attendees. That way, when you communicate in chat, everyone will be able to read the comments that you're sharing throughout today's event. So if you could take a quick moment, if you could locate the chat panel, if you could select all panelists and attendees. And what I'd love to do is invite you to let us know where you're calling in from today and why it's important for you to be here. So if you could take a quick moment, let us know where you are in the world today, let us know why it's important for you to be here today, and we would love to interact with you in the chat. We have folks continuing to come on, and we will get started in just a few moments. So welcome in Fargo, North Dakota, and in Denver, in Milwaukee, in Duluth, Minnesota, in Florida, in Iowa, Michigan. Relevant topic. Oh my goodness, it's moving so fast. I often will invite people to mention their organizations when they chat with us, and I've noticed that a few of you are mentioning your organizations, but this chat panel is moving so fast that I haven't quite yet been able to see it all. It looks like someone is dealing with a restructure of an IT department and wanted to come in today to address that. Welcome in India, in Louisiana, in Virginia, and in Canada. It looks like we have quite an international audience today. So thank you to many of you who are calling in and letting us know where you're calling in from today. You may be wondering if we are going to record today's session, and maybe you can see that we are recording today's session, and this will be available to folks later for continued learning or sharing with your colleagues. We also are broadcasting live on Facebook today, so if you happen to be on Facebook while you're on the webinar, you could even take a quick moment, hop over to the Designed Learning page on Facebook and give this video a share so that we can reach a wider audience with our content. Maybe some friends of yours who are on Facebook right now could benefit from this content today. Welcome in Monroe, Michigan. Crystal in Monroe, you are not so far from me. My office is in Monroe County, Michigan, in Lambertville. So it's a small world kind of thing. So hi to you, Crystal. And I hope that today's content is valuable with the companies that you're working with who have struggles in these areas. So thank you to all of you who are joining. We will invite you throughout today's event to continue to share any comments, questions, insights, compliments, curiosities, all in the chat, and we will throughout today's event have a chance to answer some of those as well as at the end of the hour. Again, we would remind you to please select all panelists and attendees when you talk to us in chat so that we can everyone can see the content that you're sharing. So I'm curious for those of you who have joined us today, what previous exposure you may have had to designed learning and or flawless consulting. So if you want to take a moment and tell us that in the chat as well. So before we go any further, hi Jeff. I should have probably said hi sooner.
No worries. Hello, greetings from Elyria, Ohio, west of Cleveland. So not too far from Michigan as well. It's great to have so many folks from around the world, it sounds like, with us today.
And it sounds like a mixture of some people who have had exposure to design learning and flawless consulting and some who have no previous experience. So we'll be sure to fill you all in. So for those of you who might not know, Jeff Evans is a vice president at Design Learning. He's responsible for delivery of flawless consulting workshops around the world. And in fact, we'll be traveling to London next week for our first ever public offering in London, which is pretty exciting. So we wish you safe travels. And before that, we have the chance today to talk about this important topic of building trusted business partnerships during times of organizational upheaval. So Jeff, as we begin to dive into today's topic, maybe you can give us a bit more context of what you mean by trusted business partnerships. And I'm guessing that for most of the people on today's call, explaining organizational upheaval is not necessary, unfortunately.
Yeah, I think it feels like sometimes we're in that every day. So again, welcome. So So yeah, we're going to utilize just some of there's lots of words in this titles, trusted business partnerships, I think is something that at least from my career at work, but also in personal relationships, trusted partnerships are important as we build relationships, which really is and has been the focus of Peter Block's work over the past 40 years on how do we really truly build the relationship side of the work in addition to delivering technical work. So many of us, whether we're individual contributors, if you will, leaders, if we're inside of an organization, if we consult outside, I think there's always a chance to build these partnerships. And I think a lot of times where at least I know I've kind of maybe fallen off track is when I've taken some things for granted or when the pressure's outside of me, including organizational upheavals and things begin to weigh. It's sometimes more difficult to really focus in on that. So we're just going to explore a little bit today on how can we do better at even building the relationships in times of change. And I know, as you said, we're changing all the time. But business partnerships and that whole thing around trust, I think, is something that's I'm always, it's one of those journeys I think I'm always on to build trust. It's easy to lose trust and it takes a while to gain it. And I do think through some of our processes and things and learnings, we can actually accelerate trust at times by really kind of having the best conversations that we need to have as we really do our work together.
So let's set some context for those who may or may not know about what we mean when we use the word consultant.
Yeah, absolutely. So just as a basics for the work that we're doing here. So really consulting, some people will say, hey, I'm not a consultant. I am a consultant. I hate consultants. I love consultants. There's things all the way around there, but it truly is more of the consulting as an action that we are continually consulting with others. And from our definition is we're in a position to influence without direct control. That really is the premise of Peter's work on flawless consulting. And I think the more I really think about that really describes my day-to-day life, inside organizations, outside organizations, and whether I'm in a formal leadership position or as a single contributor, it really is a chance to do that. So when we say consulting, it's the business partnerships, it's really influencing without that direct control.
I love that. So let's talk a little bit more about that, Jeff. And why would that be so important in times of change?
Yeah, so let's just kind of talk a little bit about. Let me go back here into the title. Let me just organizational upheaval. That can mean a lot of different things. I mean, there's major things I know we have all lived through. We have all survived. Sometimes to be honest, maybe I've even created some of the upheaval in my organizations. But it could be, we're getting new leadership, shifting roles. There's some of the bigger things when our company's going through a merger or an acquisition. The dreaded terminology of downsizing, right sizing, that really leads at times to layoffs, restructuring, somebody mentioned before. All these things are I think, ever present with the work, but I think even more, what we're going to talk about today is the more formal ones when it really feels like, hey, we are just in such a upheaval right now, I feel frozen. The organization feels frozen. We got to wait. We got to wait for the next leader to come. We got to wait to hear from on high, okay, what the direction's going to be. So a lot of times what happens is we go into this freeze state. And I think it's a normal reaction. It's how I acted and have reacted before, but we're going to explore today, what are some things that we can be doing in spite of these large changes, in spite of the unknown, because I think a lot of these things when I've just kind of gone through my list here about mergers, downsizing, acquisitions, new leadership, it really kind of boils down to a time of uncertainty. We're not certain of what might be coming. And when we get uncertain, sometimes we go back to old habits. We want to just kind of rely on the relationships that we already have. So that's just kind of where I want to start a little bit, talking about that the best way to build business partnerships during times of upheaval is to do it before the upheaval hits. So it's, and a lot of times people will say, well, I get that, but I'm in the middle of it. What do I do? We'll talk about that. But the best thing would be is when things are more stable. I know nothing's ever normal. But as we're doing our work together, It really is every day in the conversations that I have. Am I investing in and paying attention to the quality of the relationship as well as the technical work that we're doing together? And by doing that, when we do get some times of change, uncertainty, it helps a little bit more that we've already built that relationship as that goes forward.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. So just a little bit. These are the actual consulting phases. Folks that are familiar with Peter's work, and even not, these are the basic phases that we all go through, whether intentionally or not, when we're working on a project or working in an organization, in a community, volunteer work, anything. There's initial agreement on what we're going to do and how we're going to work together. We gather information, what we call discovery. Either we do that or other people do it to really understand, to get to the root cause of the situation. Then we come together and make some decisions based on that information to take action. And those are the first three steps I have highlighted in green here. We call the preliminary phases to the main event, which is implementation. So all of those things, again, happen, sometimes more intentionally than not as we move forward. And the key is, as we start implementing, then do we really have the trusted relationship as we move forward into the actual change that we're trying to implement? The last phase, then, evaluation. We'll talk a little about that here in a minute. Is, hey, how did it go? Did we get the results that we're looking for? Do we need to recycle back? So that's really the 5 phases, if you will, of flawless consulting and of consulting. And what I found interesting, and maybe interested to hear some feedback from the folks that are listening in today, is that this is kind of how things should work. We'd like it to work, and if I pay attention, it can work. But what usually happens when an upheaval comes, when a new leader, a merger happens, is we get basically told, or we actually for ourselves say, you know what, stop all implementation. We got to take a pause. Don't invest, don't go forward. Whether it's a formal announcement from our leadership or whether it's my own inclination as an individual that says, you know what, before we invest too much more time and effort in this particular initiative, let's sit and wait. And the challenge then is, as we're sitting and waiting, what happens? Uncertainties out there. We start adding things in that might happen. We sometimes a lot of wasted energy. We tap into the rumors that might be happening, going on. So all these things, at least I know I experience myself, really is an inclination that says when a major change happens, we kind of stop to reflect, which is not a bad thing. A lot of times, in fact, in the work that we do, we say we want to hit the pause button every once in a while as we get caught up in action. But the question becomes is, if I completely stop or pause everything, is that the best for me as an individual, for my team, for the organization going forward? I think it makes sense to kind of reflect on what might be happening, but what are some of the things that we can be doing? What are some of the pieces that say, all right, we do have a major shift, we have new people coming in, or we have some people leaving, whatever this restructuring, merger is causing for us. What I'm encourage you guys to do and for us to look at would be the last phase. This can be a really good time to kind of step back in evaluation. How have things been going? Are we achieving the different things that we want to achieve? Potentially the good news of this stop in implementation is maybe there we have, as we've paused a project, maybe some of the pending deadlines might be put on hold as well. So that could be something that we actually sit back and say, all right, given that we're not doing more specific work on this particular initiative, how is it going? What shifts will we make? What conversations have we had? And how do we actually move some things forward? So that really is kind of the focus here as far as what do we do when we pause? And then from there, what actions can we take that would be not taking things too far that's going to go against the change, but also not get into such of a hunkering down into our own little areas, waiting for something else to happen. What can we proactively, assertively take on that would make sense for us to move some things forward?
So Jeff, can we reflect for a moment maybe on some real life situations you've seen where applying these skills in these phases were helpful at a time of upheaval in an organization you were working in?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I've been through small ones, big ones, lived through them, survived them, and things. I think The biggest one was with one of the major autos. This is back in the days of large layoffs and things, back in the late 90s and early 2000s. And we were actually asked to lay off 20% of the workforce. And we were in human resources, so we had some activity with that, but also in our organization, we had to take a look at what might be happening. So as soon as those kind of announcements or things started happening, our goal as the internal organizational change folks were tasked to go out and meet with and talk with and work with leaders on these possible changes. What we found for ourselves, though, is that we were being asked to cut back and make changes too. So those individual fears that were popping up for me and the rest of my team were kind of making us feel numb. And we're really kind of putting us into this term, how can I go out and help others deal with this change when I'm not even sure if I, as an individual, know what's going to happen first, what's going to happen next. So we didn't handle it perfectly. There were times when we could have done some things better, but what we found is that on a daily basis, we would just kind of check in with each other. What are we hearing? What's our reaction to what we're hearing? Anything that we want to do more of differently to actually support ourselves, so then we can go out and support the rest of the organization in these major changes. So it really got down to intentionally having conversations as much as possible. Becky, I think what we found can we get comfortable enough right now in the uncertainty, knowing that I'd love to have the answers. I'd love to know what tomorrow's going to bring. I'd love to know, is my job intact for tomorrow? Is my team intact? What might be happening? All those things that kind of go through our heads. And just kind of knowing that, realizing that we're all going through these uncertainties, and just to kind of share, okay, what can we have influence with? What are some things we can control, and not trying to push away the concerns, but not letting the concerns drive us underground, if you will, so we couldn't be effective in what we were being asked to do.
That's helpful. So maybe we can shift and talk about in greater detail how we can apply these flawless consulting skills in times of upheaval. So what are some of the things that are more difficult to move forward during times like this?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's all difficult. I mean, I think part of it is just to kind of being open with others to say that this is not easy. I mean, this is not something we choose. We intellectually know every organization goes through these things, and we hope and we know that we'll come out the other side. But kind of knowing that in our head and feeling that in our gut are two different things. So what I want to just kind of focus a little bit here on is really the first phase, what we call the entry and contracting, and in particular, take a look at what I'm calling these first 4 steps of a conversation. So this is, I really want to hone this again away from whether it's a consulting client relationship, a boss employee, and really get it down to us as individuals. There's me and there's you. And depending on our relationship, whether we're colleagues, whether I am a boss or a leader, or I'm talking to my clients and things, it truly is having these conversations often as possible. And it really is focusing in on this first step, which is what we call a personal acknowledgement. And the personal acknowledgement really goes back, let me back up a chart here to a basic premise of flawless consulting, where a key piece is being authentic, and the bullet here about put into words what we're experiencing. That's a statement that, hey, that sounds easy, sure, but putting that into practice when I feel stressed, when I don't know how I'm going to be taken, I don't know what's going to happen next, but truly to share with you as a colleague, as a boss, as a client, you know what? Things are uncertain for me right now. I don't know what might be happening. So that's where this comes to life in the conversations that we have. And I would also kind of say, as a leader, if you happen to be in more of a formal leadership role, as you encourage these conversations with your team, you really help them and share with them. So you want to hear how they're feeling about what's happening. What we want as individual contributors, a lot of times that I have found, is to have the answers from the top. If they would just tell us, we always say they, would just tell us. And a lot of times what I've learned as I've worked at top levels of the organization is the folks at the higher levels are just as confused and sometimes even more so than we are because they're getting different messages. So just really pulling forward with and saying, you know what, I'm concerned, or I'm a little afraid today what might be happening, or I'm excited about this, whatever that is. So this personal acknowledgement is the best way to start any conversation on the phone, in person, on webinars, just to kind of pull some things together. So, you know what, things aren't going great for me right now. I'll get through it and I'm okay. And I'm curious to say, how are you feeling about how things are going forward? Now, what are you hearing? How can we work through there? And from there, move into the kind of the second part of the process is, okay, what do we want to accomplish? What can we accomplish today on this phone call, in this meeting, during this week, given what they know, given what I know, and then moving into what do you want from me, and here's what I want from you. So it really is these first 4 steps of a conversation that takes some time to pause, to ask people how are they experiencing things today, and to share with them how I'm experiencing things today as we move some things forward. And I, even as I hear myself talk a little bit, Becky, I'm not trying to minimize the amount of stress that goes on in upheaval. It can really, it has shaken my world. I've been downsized. I've been part of a thing where I've been asked to leave an organization because of different things. And I absolutely get it. It's painful. And the pain really is about, hey, where am I going to be going next? My own uncertainty. And part of it would be, I'm encouraging people to do is other people feel the same types of pain. And how can we come together? So given that kind of shared pain, what can we proactively do to make today better? What can we proactively do to make this conversation better? And ultimately, how can we help others in the organization get through, understand, and manage the major changes that the organization is dealing with?
Sure. So, Jeff, this is really helpful. And I want to circle back to a couple of things on this list. You talked a lot about this idea of personal acknowledgement, but having just gotten a refresher on flawless consulting, because I was in a workshop a couple of weeks ago, one of the things that stood out to me is the importance of this communicating understanding of the situation. Could you go a little bit deeper there and explain exactly what this looks like and why it matters?
Absolutely. It's a great point, Beck, because just looking at this and you look at, hey, well, of course we do these things. My personal learning is this whole communicate understanding of the situation is a listening piece much more than it is a telling piece. So if I'm working with you as a leader, as a colleague, and we're trying to figure out what is happening next, I ask you to describe your perspective. How do you see things? And before I move on and say, okay, I understand what you're saying, Becky, let's go do some things, I actually share back with you what I've heard. It's the art of active listening. It's been around for a long time. I think most of us have been exposed to it and we know it. The question for me is, do I take the time to do it? My learning is that I've been told that I'm a good listener. But what I can find myself doing is taking good notes. And once my colleague or my client finishes their conversation, I basically say, got it, and I move on. What I don't know is, do I got what they were trying to say? So it's an active piece for clarity that says, let me understand. So this is your concern today. This is what you want to make sure we do today. Here's where you have some energy. Here's the people you want to kind of deal with. Did I get it? Is this, am I seeing it like you're seeing it? And to quote one of my mentors from years ago, Kathleen Dannemiller, Art of Change, Whole Scale Change. And she always would tell me, she says, let's make sure you're seeing the world through the other person's eyes. Pause enough to be able to see the world the way they're seeing it, not to agree with them, not to argue with them, just to truly be present with them to say, you know what, is this how you see it? I can see you see it this way. It's an art. It takes some time, and it's invaluable to really do that. And I just said it takes some time. It probably takes an extra 2 or 3 minutes for me to pause and just say, is this what you're saying? Is this how you see things? And from that perspective, I know when I've been on the receiving end, I feel more valued. I feel like, hey, this person gets me and gives me a little bit of a sense of we're in this together. And as indicated earlier, when we're in the times of upheaval, knowing that we're kind of in things together is very helpful. So it's kind of a 2-step process that really is that I listen, I share back with you what I've heard, and then we move into, based on this common understanding, how do we want to work together? What do we want to do together? What's going to be the best next steps?
Sure. So before we move on, we did have a question from Nick, and I think it's referencing this idea of sharing of wants and offers. And Nick says he finds it interesting what people think they need. I always try to understand, do they really need what they think they need? So any comments on that?
It kind of goes back to the quote from the Rolling Stones, right? You might not get what you want, you get what you need, from our Mick Jagger friend. But I think it's that is part of the process. And I think for me, it's not completely me understanding what they want as much as I'm helping them understand what they want. And it's a fine line of, I'm not trying to make them wrong. It really is the first statement somebody makes. You know what, Jeff, I want this change to happen. I want it to happen by tomorrow. And the more I go into more details, we find out, well, it's actually this other piece of it. So I don't want to go into it and say, well, I'm gonna discover what you want for you and tell you. It's more this co-exploration to really understand by asking some questions. So this is how you stated, this is what you want now. Let me get some other perspectives. And I know for me, I'm not always clear what I want. I think I am. It might be in my head, but when I articulate it, and actually when I hear it back from somebody else, I might say, that might have been what I said, but what I really want is. So just this process of sharing back helps me get clear as the one that's talking, as well as helps you get clear on the one that might be helping me, coaching me, consulting with me as it goes through. So absolutely, Nick, the end goal is to really understand, what are the true needs of the organization and the individual, not just the, as Peter would call it, the symptoms of the presenting issue of what might be initially what our wants are.
That makes sense. So can we take another look at some ways to apply the flawless consulting skills to times of upheaval?
Yeah, so I think part of it is is the conversations that we're having, and I think the other piece, when we really understand what our wants are of each other, then it's taking this conversation to the organization. So it's not enough that just you and I as colleagues or as bosses or one small part of the organization understand that. How can we begin having these larger conversations with more people in the organization? And that's where our sphere of influence, I think, really makes a difference, in that every conversation that I have gives me a chance to influence and to understand. So just because a colleague of mine and I sit down and we really feel like we have a good understanding, what about the rest of the organization? How are they seeing it? How is the organization trying to make some of these changes happen? So it really is the conversations individually, which then expand out to the conversations more globally, if you will, within the organization. And again, I think the key for me is just that we admit that we're in times of uncertainty, and that I'm not going to have an answer today. And that even when I push the leadership to give me an answer that they may not have, that's part of it, knowing that they might not have the answer either, as we kind of walk through.
So are there any other important aspects to remember when we enter these conversations? I think that there might have been some more steps on this slide.
Yeah, so let me just kind of go back to what we again, the definition of flawless. Flawless is not making no mistakes, is not being perfect. It truly is approaching the process with these pieces. So I think I talked about put into words what you're experiencing. Really share with, I'm nervous, or I'm uncertain, whatever that might be. But the other piece I just want to call our attention to is the whole thing around compassion. I think there are times, as I've experienced upheaval, when I wasn't sure about my future, my compassion level went down. I would kind of say, it's all about me. And as my compassion level goes down, I kind of forget the fact that other people in the organization, including leaders, other people in the community, including the folks that are individual contributors, are doing the things, probably are going through a lot of turmoil and things as well. So while I want to make sure I'm focused on my own needs, it really is out there saying, you know what, it is a tough time for you. If you have the opportunity to work with leaders of the organization, just letting them know that, hey, that they're in a tough role as possible. They may have some information that they've been given by somebody that they can't share yet. They may be part of the conversations through mergers where they haven't figured out who the new partners are going to be yet. So they're going through a lot of what can I share, what can't I share. So it's just having some compassion. And I think one of my kind of mantras going in when I work with people, and I try to live by this, is truly to assume positive intent. Assume that my leaders, even though I want them to give me answers, they don't have them for me, that they're trying to make the organization work as best as possible. And really sharing with them my concerns, but also asking for them what concerns do they have as they actually go through the process. So that kind of talks about the other side of being authentic. It's the balance of being compassionate as well.
So talk some more about this idea of completing the business of each phase.
Absolutely. Yeah. So this is, when we say the each phase, these are going back to the consulting phases. So as I said, as we started off with, all of these phases happen. A lot of times they don't happen intentionally or not enough time, but the key piece would be is before I jump into taking action, which is really the implementation phase, let's make sure that we have an agreement of not only what we're going to do together, but how we're going to work with each other. And again, putting it back into these times of upheaval when there's, uncertainty is breeding every day. I think part of that is that we start a conversation that we just say, you know what, we agree that we're going to talk about the uncertainty. I think many times in organizations, if we can't talk about it because it's a sensitive topic. Well, I think talking about it helps make it not so sensitive. And there's going to be some information in these changes that we don't know and we might not be open to, but just the fact of talking to it, we're living in uncertainty. How does that work as we go through? The discovery phase, then, what I'm going to talk a little bit about here is kind of going back to what can we be doing. So that would be where I talked before about taking it beyond just a one-on-one conversation, going out in the organization and being present, encouraging people to share. What are they seeing? What do they know? What don't they know? Begins to get a feel for what is the mood, what's out there. As one person say, we want to discover and find out what the rumors are before they actually move into facts. So how do we really kind of talk about some of those things? So we're always in discovery mode. And this just really is a chance to understand what else is going on in the organization so I can build my database of perspectives. Building my database of perspectives can help me maybe see the issue differently and not just from one person or my own perspective as that goes forward. And then the feedback and decision making would be kind of coming together as individuals or as a team to say, given what we know, what would be the most useful today? How can we help the organization? How can we help the team? How can we help the community group, whoever we're working with, to really understand so we aren't just in this frozen state, that we are out there taking some action, but also not taking action just to be doing something, but more intentional actions so we can understand more about the change, we can learn more about timing, and then really help move some things forward. So when we do get some of these answers, when it is finally announced of who our new merger partner is, when it is finally announced who the new CEO or who the new mayor is, or who the new whatever we're waiting for gets announced, we don't start from scratch to say, okay, now we can start working again. We've been working all along up until that point to be ready for whatever changes are coming toward us. So what actions can we take during this implementation? And then the last piece is that we're continually evaluating. How's it going? What's going forward? So the idea of not, of completing the business of each phase is we don't want to just start here at implementation. Let's have some agreement, get a clear picture, decide what we're going to go do some things. How are we doing? And there's always a chance to cycle back through the phases. But if we skip phases, what I have found, what a lot of folks have found, is that we actually don't talk about the key issues earlier on, and it makes implementation that much more difficult when we skip the phases.
So where might we possibly get stuck, Jeff? And what can we do if we feel like we're getting stuck?
Yeah, getting stuck. That's a very important terminology that we've used before. Let me just this is the full contracting conversation, just to kind of pull it out for people to take a look at. I did a deep dive into the first 4 steps. The question comes up is, on this right-hand side, when we feel stuck. And a lot of times it is whether people aren't giving me what I want or there's a lot of weird behavior. So the key piece around when we get stuck is to really, as hard as it might be, let's talk about the fact that we're stuck. What usually happens when I get stuck is I try to go around it, or I try to go at it a different way, as opposed to, hey, Becky, you and I are having this conversation and it feels like we're not making any progress. What might be happening? So there's a chance to kind of understand what some of those pieces are that we can move into. And there's a whole other topic. We can do another webinar on the whole piece on resistance and how to deal with that. But I think the key thing for me is that when I get stuck, to ask myself a key question: how am I contributing to the fact that I'm stuck? What have I been doing or not doing that might be causing me, the other person, the team, the organization to feel stuck? And there's always something. Either I've ignored something, or I haven't shared something, or I've gone down a different pace. In these times of upheaval and potential huge organizational change, maybe I've just kind of stayed at my desk or in my computer. I don't want to lift my head up because I'm afraid what might happen. So there's a piece that we're always contributing some way as we get stuck. There is no easy answer. I wish I could say, hey, you do these 3 pieces and everything's going to be fine. But what I do find is be authentically saying, I feel stuck. Authentically saying with somebody else, I'm uncertain. I'm not sure. I don't even know if I can take this next step based on what I've heard. Just making that public with other people that I trust in other areas is a step toward unlocking the chances of staying stuck in the organization.
It's really helpful. I wanted to quickly highlight a note from Gabrielle, who said that this authenticity has been most helpful in her experience, that clients are much readier to forgive you when things don't go in their favor, as they appreciate that you've been authentic all along.
And authentic can kind of be a buzzword, to be honest. And I think anybody I say, do you want to be authentic? I think everybody says yes. Of course I do, right? But it's until we kind of break that down to some levels. What am I willing to do? What's the risk of me speaking up and saying, this isn't working for me? Knowing that, I might not be seen as a team player, or that's not part of our culture to say those type of things. But I do it in a way that's not complaining. If I can, it's not, I'm trying to get you to fix something for me. And that can be a tendency I know I have at times when I feel like things are being done to me in these big things of upheaval. But it truly is to say, I'm not sure what's happening. This just doesn't feel right now. Or it feels like we're on the wrong path. I like to talk more about it. It's an invitation to talk about it, not to have somebody else come and fix it for me. And I would say I had the same experience working with all levels of organizations, in volunteer work, in business work, in our own small team at Design Learning, even to the point of, this is an invitation to have a conversation. I'm not expecting you to fix it, but right now, this is what I'm experiencing. What are you experiencing? And it might be different, but just that understanding can really help us move forward. And in the long term, what I found is that being authentic and compassionate gets people to respect me more. They've respected the fact that I've kind of called things out where I'm not pleased, or where I'm confused, or those types of things. So it's being clear about sharing what I'm experiencing, and truly inviting from you to share what you're experiencing, no matter what level we're at, no matter what area of the business, the organization, the community that we're in. We want to invite others to share as much as I want to share what's going on.
Sure. And going back to the title of the webinar, building trusted business partnerships. It seems like, Jeff, the things that you're articulating, when you can acknowledge what's happening in the moment, talk about what you're experiencing, be compassionate for what others are experiencing, that's where the trust begins to form.
Yeah, it really does. And just kind of going back, I would just go back to these 4 steps again, Becky, because a lot of people, and I would agree to a certain extent that it takes time to build trust. And you can start it right away in the very first conversation you have with somebody by saying, you know what, I'm excited to be working with you today, or I'm a little cautious. I haven't worked in this area before. This personal acknowledgement, it makes me a little bit vulnerable. That's a trust building step. And asking you, and I'm curious, how do you feel about working with me, is another key piece as that goes forward. So that's these steps, although they feel linear, it really is elements of a conversation, and might be surprised how quickly we can begin to build trust through using these steps.
That's really useful. So I referenced earlier that I did have the opportunity to get a refresher on Flawless Consulting when I attended a public offering of Flawless just this month in Toledo, Ohio, which was a first for design learning. And before we switch to some Q&A, I just want to make sure that everyone knows on the call that we do deliver, a much expanded version of the few things that you've experienced today on site with organizations, also in some public workshops. We have a virtual offering coming up in March. In addition to the London workshop next week, we also have workshops in Red Bank, New Jersey in May and September. So if you're curious about any of those, please be sure to stay on the line. We have some phone numbers and email addresses where you can contact us. But we do want to give a chance, if there are some questions from attendees, for you to put those in the chat. We invite you to do so now. And as you have them, I'll be happy to read those out and talk with Jeff a bit more.
Yeah, as we're waiting for some of those questions to come in, I think a lot of times, even as I look through this and some of these steps, it's like, well, this is pretty basic, Jeff. This it can sound so simple as we go through. And I guess my answer to that is yes, it kind of is basic, and it kind of falls in the category for me of, common sense, but not necessarily common practice. And especially in times of upheaval, when stress is up, when I'm really concerned about the future, I don't necessarily think clearly. So getting back to basics is really a key piece that we can do. And we have the complete power to have these conversations with other people. And as we do these things, kind of get back to, well, yeah, I've known this person for a long time. We don't need to mess with that kind of stuff. Let's just get down to work. The danger of that is that the tendency could be these great relationships can deteriorate if we don't really pay attention to what got us there. Doesn't take long. Hey, really appreciate working with you. I know you have my back. I have your back. I'm a little cautious right now because I've heard some things. Can we talk about this? Can we talk about that? That's the dialogue. That's the conversation that continues to build the trust individually and collectively through tough times. And it helps us even as we're in the good times to really even make sure we have more of those as well.
Sure. So here's a question coming in from Roland. He's wondering, Jeff, what might be different when your organization is experiencing exponential change versus linear or planned change? Really difficult question.
Yeah, it is, Roland. Great question. And I would have to say I've never experienced linear change. Even some of the old change models kind of let us alone. Hey, well, you do this step, then you do this step. It's tough. And I know a lot of companies, a lot of organizations, the exponential changes, that major changes happen, it feels like daily. And I think part of that would be just to understand what do I have influence over? Where do I have some control? Where are my questions going through? And I would just encourage is from a purely change management perspective is more often I encourage groups to get together in groups and talk about what they're experiencing. I think too many times, even with exponential change, people just kind of sit back and they wait to communicate anything until it's all done. Well, guess what, folks? It's never all done. So as much as possible, let's talk about what we're hearing. Let's talk about what we can influence today. People have heard before, what's your sphere of influence? What do we need to know so we can move forward? What might we never know the answer to, and be okay with that? And really get the understanding to what might happen, because as soon as we think we get a lock on what the change is going to be, it changes. And if I get too locked in to one change, it's going to be suboptimal. Yet if I get too open just to say everything's going to change, I'm going to get into my frozen state and do nothing. So it's that fine-tuned balance, I think, Roland. And that's a great question. And I think there's a lot of great expertise out there in the organizations and how to more effectively deal with change. I don't even like the word manage change because that also feels very linear. How do we deal with changes organizationally, kind of even organically, to really get the best results for the organization as well as the best results for us individuals?
When you mentioned earlier in the call, Jeff, the importance of learning how to get comfortable with uncertainty and learning how to deal with uncertainty. And I would bet, and I'd love to invite people to go ahead and tell us in the chat, are you dealing with uncertainty at work today? I bet you are. If you are, go ahead and just type yes. And my guess is almost everybody has some uncertainty related to their job every day. And so learning how to get comfortable with uncertainty is a critical piece of this.
Absolutely. And I think there's maybe even back to Roland's question, there's different levels of uncertainty, and I get it. I mean, I think every day there's some uncertainty. Some are much bigger. Especially as certain large organizational multi-billion-dollar buyouts. There's big reductions here and there. There's all industries. There's different industries are in huge growth. Other industries are in huge decline. So I think it's just an understanding of really not being blind to the fact that there's a lot of change happening and that it's stressful, but also not let that uncertainty and that stress drive me to a point of inaction. It drives me to a point of inaction, or even drives me to a point of action, which is detrimental to what I really know needs to happen for the organization and for me personally, and how can I really get clear about what some of those things are. It's a journey. It's an ongoing challenge, I know, for me, and no one change that I've been through is ever the same, yet it still has a lot of similarities on human beings are involved. More conversation is better than no conversation, and authenticity and compassion together helps me deal with any of these changes much more easily and gets me better results as opposed to moving toward non-authentic and non-compassion.
Yeah, that's really helpful. More conversation is better than no conversation. Authenticity and compassion together can make a difference in building relationship and trust. Jeff, let's take a look at the final slide. I know we have your contact information if people want to find out more, have some additional questions on these topics. Also your cell phone number so everybody can hit you up on chat, text, and blow up your phone. We also were going to share the phone number for Chris Witt. Chris Witt is in our Oxford office and is open to all sorts of questions about bringing Flawless to your organization. And so Kelly is putting Chris Witt's email address and phone number in the chat. We will be sending out today's slides as a PDF for your continued learning, and also the link to this recording in the event that you would like to share this with others. We thank you so much for investing your time with us today. Thank you, Jeff.
Thank you, guys. Have a great week.